This video is sponsored by Keeps.
It's tabletop time. I'm Jed.
I'm Murray.
I'm Jazza.
And I'm Dave. And today we're going to be building some awesome terrain.
This is all building up to one amazing group project because the previous video we made all of these minis, and then in working on that it's like, okay, well now we have to play D&D, right?
Just so you know, after you watch this video, you can actually go watch us use all this terrain and those minis over on Tabletop Time Roleplay. Part 2 of our D&D 4-part series is coming out, or will be out by the time this video comes out. We had loads of fun and it's so satisfying seeing all the minis in terrain. So go check it out and subscribe to Tabletop Time Roleplay for more roleplay.
So in this video, we're going to be exploring 3 different ways to make terrain with 2 different types of files for printing, but also scratch building. So stick around for that.
The rest of the team is going to be working with a lot of 3D printed elements, but not everyone has a 3D printer, and making terrain can be really fun and cheap and simple. As simple as a scrappy offcut piece of foam core board.
It's always really nice when the foam core board layer comes off really smoothly and satisfyingly. It's just my favourite part of the process.
And this one wasn't even very good. The surface doesn't come off as smoothly as some higher quality ones, but no problem. I rough up the surface a bit and created an edge between where the grass would be and where the path would be with a bit of milliput mixed up and textured. Then using a modelling compound, which is sort of like a half plaster, half paper mix, I separated it into 2 batches and mixed 2 different colours. A nice slightly green earthy brown for where the grass would go, and a very reddish terracotta colour for where the cobblestone paving would go down. Now when it started to firm up after a couple of minutes, I went over it with a textured roller to give it that cobblestone aesthetic. After giving the whole thing a coat in a matte Mod Podge to create a seal and separate what I'd done already, it was time to apply a wash over all of the tiles before doing some final overbrushing and preparing the base of where the grass could go, so that with a little bit of colour and a little bit of a sandy texture where the path would be, and then with a bit of grass on top, this is going to have a really natural, nice look. But I want to make sure everything is fully dry before I go on to the next step to try and get the best grass effect I possibly can.
Alright, so next day, it's all dried and set and I'm ready to do the grass. Rather than jumping straight onto the grass, I'm going to dabble before I dive on a test piece of terrain. And surprise, surprise, there are actual steps that people follow to get a great result. Starting off with a reasonably thick layer of PVA. With my brush dipped in a bit of water, slightly thinning it out, I'm going to coat the area I want to put the static grass down in. That's called static grass because you can use a static applicator to make the grass stand up on end with a really subtle static charge that runs through the adhesive liquid. Let's put the charge in, turn it on, and simply shake. So I'm finding it's standing upright in some areas. I actually think I'm too far away, so I'm going to get closer. Yeah, that's already much better. I also want to try layering it up by using a spray adhesive, gently giving it a misting and putting in another application, essentially allowing it to be taller grass. And it turns out that if you just take a few steps, double before you dive, and carefully follow instructions, you can get a good result quicker and be more confident on the final project. I just like the chaos of leaping into it sometimes, but for some things, it's probably just not worth risking, so you can get it right the first time. And for other things, you may only get one chance to do it right, like preventing hair loss, which is why I'm grateful this video is sponsored by Keeps. I'm going to share a little bit about Keeps as we jump into the dive of my park project. The reality is 2 out of 3 guys will experience hair loss by the time they're 35. But Keeps is a subscription service that allows you to get the hair retention care you need without ever even needing to visit a doctor's office. All Keeps treatment plans are doctor recommended and delivered straight to your door, and about half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. These are clinically proven, research-backed treatments to stop hair loss and improve hair growth. Keeps physicians and experts will help you select the right products and treatments for your specific condition and your hair goals. And it's an easy subscription, so you can get refill reminders so you never run low on the products you need to take care of your hair. So if you want to stop hair loss in its tracks, hair loss stops with Keeps. And to get 50% off of your first order, go to keeps.com/tabletoptime or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/tabletoptime. I hope you enjoyed my little park. With the right steps, it turned out pretty bloody awesome. On to everyone else doing a lot of other stuff. Oh my god, we took on way too much for this video. I can't wait to play D&D though!
We already knew we had the full Tavern pack from Loot Studios that we were going to be using, which meant it was pretty obvious that we'd be wanting a nice Tavern setting to put all those beautiful props and NPCs in. I went to an old favorite website of mine, Printable Scenery, and I found a set of open lock tiles that I liked. These tiles are really cool because they're completely interchangeable with dozens of sets. So you can have dungeons that transition into taverns, etc. They come with an easy to print clip file that you can use to join all the pieces together. I grabbed a nice rustic stone and wood tavern set, some wooden floors, as well as a stairwell. And I lay out a few print beds and got these printing overnight. Now, while the tavern was fun and ultimately where we'd be starting our adventure, oftentimes in Dungeons & Dragons, it's important to have combat zones a lot more than non-combat zones. I'd already spent much of the previous week trawling through Loot Studios files, and I knew there was an awesome sewer set that we had from their backlog. And this would serve as the location for most of the hostile encounters in our special day of D&D.
I primed everything first in just a spray of Chaos Black, giving this just 2 or 3 coats to really make sure that it was completely covered. Once the pieces were primed, it was time to put some colour down. Murray had shown me previously that using the different coloured sprays, the blue, the green and the red on top, could really make models pop. So I decided to just use the same technique again with the terrain. This time kind of trying to go for a zenithal lighting from red downwards after I'd laid my blue and green colours. Once all of the sprays had dried down, it was time for a light dry brush on all of the wood pieces. I used the same technique that we had used in the previous videos with all of the minis bases that looked like they were sitting on wood. It just made everything consistent and it was super easy and meant I could get this terrain done nice and quick. Once all of the wood texture was done on all of the terrain pieces, it was time to move on to this beautiful stone texture. To keep with the lighting that I had created in all of these pieces, I went for this purpley lavender light color to go on top of all of the bricks. I wanted to make sure it had a bit of that red pigment in it so that the zenithal lighting I had done still kept the same. I dry brushed it on top of all of the stones to really make the texture pop, and then created a gradient so that it was a stronger contrast at the top and then lighter as it went down. I'm pretty stoked with the way this came out. Something about the way the gradient looks on the textures and the bricks just really gives it this ambience. It just looks great and I'm really happy with it. I also picked out a few choice rocks and just made them a different color just to give some sort of variance to the wall. It didn't all need to be made from the same brick, but I also didn't need to pick out every individual brick, just one here and there to make it look a bit different. Majority of these pieces had bits of metal that needed to be highlighted and just kind of be separated from the rest of the terrain. Again, I kind of adapted Murray's very painterly style and I used a grey just for the very first base coat of these metal pieces and then went over the top with a brighter grey again, just really popping out the highlights and doing it kind of messy. These pieces are so small, I didn't need to be careful. Being messy kind of gave it this really authentic look from it. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I just love the ambience that this terrain gives. It looks like a beautiful tavern that's just warm and full of people and good food and good drinks. I cannot wait to play in it.
When Dave was painting his rat swarms, I noticed that he had used a really sort of rich terracotta style for his bricks, and after a quick discussion we decided that it would be really cool to emulate that for the sewer tiles. So I took a lighter brown and heavily dry brushed that onto all the stones. I didn't mind if the paintbrush was a bit wet for this, because I wanted to smear that colour all around the brickwork. Then I took a pale grey and started dry brushing more selectively the edges of the rocks. And occasionally, particularly if the paint spilled really harshly onto one of the bricks, I'd paint that select brick completely grey, sort of creating a random pattern of colours on the bricks. The final step for the brickwork was to take an elven flesh colour and just lightly scuffle this around the edges. Not so much a final light dry brush, but more to give the effect of some scuffed earthwork. For the metal pipes, I incorporated a lot of the browns I was putting into the brickwork, mostly because I didn't want the pipes to be shiny as such. I wanted them to be old, gritty, dirty, and have lost most of, if not all of their sheen. Like with the stonework, I started scuffling the grey onto the pipes as well. This is mostly just where they'd still have a small amount of sheen and to communicate that they are still metal. For the old metal door gates, I painted these exactly the same as the rest of the metal, but I added in some stippled ochre and dark red to signify some rust over the years. one of the sewer tiles has a monster nest infestation, including a whole lot of spider webs. I heavily overbrushed a ghostly white onto all of the spider webs and the eggs, and then I followed up with a very heavily diluted spooky green colour. This would help separate the nest from everything around it and draw some visual attention to it, while also helping it look sort of slimy and gross. For the sewer water itself, I heavily applied an aethematic blue contrast paint until the tiles themselves were practically swimming in the paint. It's fine, it probably doesn't pick it up all over there. I made sure to also paint some of the contrast paint around the metal to sort of show the reflection, and it was ready to be adventured in.
As always, we'd love to thank our patrons for all your support. We really hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into some D&D stuff, and if you'd like to see more things like this, let us know.
This one was sort of surreal. Like, this is the first time we've ever sort of done this with D&D terrain, so this was a lot of fun.
It's the first time I've ever played with fully painted miniatures and terrain, so I'm super excited for our D&D adventure.
Well, that was a monumental week. If you're watching this, I would assume you've probably already seen the painting video where we did the NPCs and the monsters, and of course the roleplay is out. If you haven't seen that, check it out on Tabletop Time Roleplay. Links in the description for our fun little adventure. It was awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, you can see everything come together, the miniatures, the terrain, and then us, if that's your thing.
Yep.
So, check it out.